It can be for either me or for Harriet or for both or whatever you want to do. We won't be able to get to everyone's questions, but you can ask questions as you come by, as long as we keep them relatively short. What are you guys interested in knowing? Right here.
What kind of crimes is Baron guilty of?
What kind of crimes is Baron guilty of? Read and find out. The first Raffo, congratulations. All right, next. What was the most difficult part in continuing the story and writing these characters? Two things were particularly difficult. One was keeping track of everything. And this is because of the exhaustive nature of Robert Jordan's deep eye for detail. There are over 2,000 characters, I think, or nearly 2,000 characters, named characters in the books. And many of these characters have distinctive voices and distinctive ways of talking, even those who haven't been viewpoint characters. And so it was a challenge. I made good use of the encyclopedia, WOT, Bob Klutz. I don't know if Bob is here, but he's actually a Texan, and it's extremely useful. At one point, this will give you a hint of the sort of level of detail. Robert Jordan's notes are very, very rich and very, very detailed. Harriet has said on several occasions that she believes that there are more words written about the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan than are contained in the series. And so that would put us at about 4 million words worth of information. At one point I was trying to keep track of everyone who was with Perrin. And I was building a kind of cheat sheet for myself to remind myself, written in my own hand, who was there and how they spoke and how they thought and what their allegiances were. And I thought, well, if there's something, I wonder if Robert Jordan did this, if there's something I can work from of his. And so I emailed the assistants, Maria and Alan, to whom the book is dedicated. They are wonderful. And they dove into the files, which they do. Robert Jordan's notes are spread across dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of different files, where he would think up something, write a few paragraphs and ideas, and then name it something, save it, and that some of them are buried in 5 folders deep. He had his own interesting filing system. This is how creative people work. We're very, it makes sense to us, but to someone else, it's just enormously complicated. And they dove in and came back to me a few days later and said, hey, we found this. And it was a file called With Perrin. And I thought, oh, great, this is exactly what I wanted. And I clicked on it and I opened it up, and it was a list of the names of all the Two Rivers folk in Perrin's army who had not yet been mentioned in the books. Okay? So we're talking dozens and dozens of names of people that he might one day use. And so he wrote them all down, and he knew them all. This is the level of detail that Robert Jordan had about the world. And so that was a real challenge. The main thing when I was writing the series that I wanted to do was I wanted to get the character voices right. I knew that I could not imitate Robert Jordan's style. I decided this early on that I would not try to imitate his prose word for word. That if I did so, it would turn into parody, like a stand-up comedian trying to imitate a way a politician speaks. And there would be all the quirks of his language and none of the beauty. Is how it would turn out. So I decided I had to instead adapt my style to the Wheel of Time. And that was a very different thing, at least in my thinking. But I wanted the characters to all feel like themselves. That was the most important thing for me. I felt that if you came to these books, and even if some of the words choices were different, if when you read Rand felt like Rand. And when you read Perrin felt like Perrin. When you read Egwene felt like Egwene. That would overcome everything else. And so the other challenging thing was to get all of the character voices correct. And of them, Avienda and Tuon were particularly challenging. Because they're from different cultures that think very differently. Avi was the hardest for me to get right. I actually threw away 2 chapters that I wrote. I tried once, tossed it, tried again, tossed it, and then wrote a 3rd one before it started to work. All right, right there.
This might be for Harriet and yourself. I was curious, what medieval Arthurian texts were in Robert Jordan's library?
Harriet, which medieval Arthurian texts were in his library?
His library was somewhere between 10 and 15,000 books. downstairs near his desk, he did not really have Arthurian. He had a lot of mythology.
Okay.
Books on religion, Asimov's Guide to the Bible, Norse, did I say Norse? Greek. You may be aware he once wrote a book about the Cheyenne Indians. That was a name, the name was Jackson O'Reilly. And after a long time I said, you know, poor old Jackson, he hasn't had any work in a long time. But it was about the Cheyenne Indians losing the corn, which they did. They were farming people, and they kept getting beat up and robbed by their warlike neighbors and forgotten who the neighbors were, and they kept moving, and they were never left at peace, and so they sat down and said, okay, this is it. We're now going to be the meanest son of a bitch warriors that I've ever seen. Because that's the only thing the world will let us do, and they did. And that's all in that book. Does this suggest anybody else? The idea, of course. So his influences were global, really, not just Arthurian. And I can't think of peculiarly Arthurian stuff.
Did he read them more? Mallory?
He must have, but I don't remember seeing a copy of it.
Okay. Thank you.
It might have been in there next to his college physics textbooks. He was an omnivore.
Yeah, he had almost as many books as he had weapons. No, I think he had way more books, but he had a lot of weapons that he would try and work out so he could describe things accurately. It was wonderful to see his armory in his own way. All right, let's do a couple more questions. Let's do someone over here in the way back. Yes, you, go for it. Yeah, we will. We'll do the book signing very shortly. And we'll let you come up to the front because you're getting it from your son who said such nice things, okay? So when we call people to the book signing, everyone knows you can come up to the front. All right, let's do another question. Okay, right here. Is there any history of the term blood and bloody ashes? Harry?
No.
All right, let's go right here.
You were mentioning his college physics textbooks. One of the things that's always bugged me, in his notes, does he work out things like conservation now? Because the whole system has to have something in it there, but man, if I can't figure it out.
Did Robert Jordan work with the law of conservation of energy? Harry, do you want me to talk about this? Okay. From what I've seen, he considered it, certainly. The power that is doing a lot of these things is coming from somewhere. As you'll recall, the original way they discovered the Dark One was because they discovered another source of energy which they felt they could use for their various weaves and things. And so the energy is coming from somewhere. The true power, for instance, is coming from the Dark One. We aren't necessarily aware what the what the one power is, what the source is, but it's there. And so the law of conservation of energy is working because there is a source for this energy. It's not coming from just nowhere, but we're not sure exactly what the foundation of that is.
Is there a sink? That's the question.
Is there a sink? Yeah. Yes. Well, the things I've read make me think that Robert Jordan considered this, but it was not something that the characters were considering, and so it wasn't appropriate to include in the books.